This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. It's the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. This is episode 223. I'm your host, Jess Root, from cardswire.com, USA Today, NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. My co-host, as always, is Seth Cox from AvengeBirds.com. That's SB Nation's NFL site for the Cardinals. Seth, we are now at our draft preview, the first of our draft previews, and this is really different than previous years, isn't it?
It is. We don't really know what's going on. This is a team that has basically created a multi-level way of looking at things and trying to create stories upon stories to see if they can kind of control what's going to happen. And we really, at this point, have no idea where it's going, where they're leaning, what they're even really looking at.
It's crazy this year. Now, what we've always done in years past leading up to the draft, we've had a quarterbacks show. We've had an offensive show. So we've previewed the quarterback position because basically ever since we started the show back in 2013, we knew the clock was ticking on Carson Palmer and they had to get a quarterback of the future. So every year we've had a quarterback preview show. Then we'd go to the rest of the offense in another show, and then we'd talk about the defensive prospects on another show, and then we would do our mock draft, something we've done every year since I think all the way back to 2013. We've done a mock draft of the first round, and with some pretty good records in terms of that list for the Cardinals last year. Last year was a surprise, but because the Cardinals now have a young quarterback, this is only kind of a quarterback preview show. So this hour plus of Cardinals talk will focus on the first pick, because the Cardinals pick at the top of the draft. And so we're going to talk about the only quarterback we'll talk about is Kyler Murray. And we'll talk about, if you haven't heard enough about Kyler Murray, we'll still talk about Kyler Murray and the implications of what the Cardinals are doing, and how they seem to have everyone convinced, yet still saying things to tell you just enough to say, well, maybe they're not going to take him. We're going to make the case for a two or three other prospects, and then look at possibilities for trading down, and then perhaps some prospects in that range. So it won't be not one position specific, and it's not one side of the ball specific. It's going to be about that first pick that they make in the draft, because we anticipate it'll be either number 1, number 4, number 6, depending on the Raiders or the Giants getting involved. Or there's even perhaps a team that is a dark horse or a long shot at least to come into the mix. So that's what's on tap with this episode of the Cards Wire podcast of Rise Up See Red. And let's talk about Kyler Murray, because we now have Cliff Kingsbury talking. He speaks glowingly of Murray, but of also Josh Rosen, and it sends a really mixed message. And what's the latest? What's the latest that he's said about Rosen? He was at the owners' meeting today. He talked about how smart, how tough, his arm talent, the things that he did, and how he's got thick skin. He's got all the confidence in the world, and really believes that he could do some good things in the offense. Now, the comments that he makes aren't nearing as glowing as what he has about Kyler Murray, right? Doesn't it feel like every time Kingsbury talks about Kyler Murray, that's a guy that he really wishes he had?
Yeah, and I think this is like where the biggest misconception is on this whole situation, is that so many people assume that when you talk about Kyler Murray, that one way or the other, you're talking negatively or something like that about Josh Rosen, and that's not really it at all. What I think is the misconception or the biggest issue is that people don't understand that Cliff Kingsbury and David Raw, how do you say his name?
David Rye,
the wide receiver coach, have literally been after Kyler Murray for 5 years now?
Yes, since he was in high school,
if not longer. So there's an affinity that goes back a long way when it comes to this guy, this player, and the affinity has grown because of the player's ability. And so it's not like you're talking about a bad player that a coach has an affinity for. I mean, this isn't Steve Keim wanting to get Mike Glennon for the last 6 years. This is a guy that was a first round pick in Major League Baseball and will now be a first round pick in the NFL. I believe that's the only player ever to do that, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I can't remember what Bo Jackson.
Pretty sure that's the case.
Deion Sanders were, but yeah, I think they're the only. He's the only player that's going to be drafted in the first round in both the NFL and the Major League Baseball draft. And so, this is just a guy that has wanted something for a long time. Never really thought it was a possibility. Because here's the thing, and I see this a lot. Like people going, well, when they hired Kingsbury, he was all in on Rosen, this, that, and the other. But if we're being completely fair, at the time, they had no idea that Murray was going to, A, declare, and B, nobody knew that he was going to give back $5 million to the Oakland A's. I mean, nobody knew that. So when you talk about a guy that, was available when they hired Kingsbury and would likely, he didn't, he wanted Josh Rosen, blah, blah, blah. Well, I think all of that is true. It's not that it's not true. And I think that's where people struggle with this whole debate, is that they're assuming that Kingsbury is, if he does like Kyler Murray or prefers Kyler Murray, that it is a shot at Josh Rosen, when it's really not. It just has to do with the fact that he's literally wanted Kyler Murray since he was a 16-year-old in high school to be his quarterback, and he finally has control where he can make that happen if he chooses to.
Yes, and that's the thing. So basically, Kyler Murray has become his unicorn that he can't quite get. It's he's never had it. Well, and then here's the thing: he recruited him hard. He thought he was going to be special in college, and then what does he do? And given his 1 year of starting experience, he is special. He's not just special, but he's incredible. And so this is a young man he saw grew up, he saw develop, and then when he had the opportunity in college, that he was special. And all the size issues and the frame issues aside, there's a conviction that he has. I'm sure Kingsbury will probably and at the same time, his comments lately. Now we know what has been going. We've heard the rumors that have gone behind the scenes. Tony Pauline said it at the combine that Kingsbury was himself was saying it's a done deal. It's Kyler. Some people are saying that Kyler's already been told that he'll be the pick. Those are the whisperings of the non-traditional, the media that don't necessarily count for anything, but they're the whispers. And so, but then at the same time, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense that he's been told, because what do you think? Like what Kingsbury said just in the last few days is true. they still haven't even gotten together as an organization in the war room to make a board to argue their case. So he hasn't been in the same room with Billy Davis and Vance Joseph to say, I think we should take Kyler because this, well, they're like, well, wait, give me Nick Bosa or give me Quinnen Williams. They still have guys scouting. They're still getting the information, and they really are. The approach they're taking of not excluding anything, obviously, in some cases, especially with the course that they took, they drafted Roses. They spoke. They believe in him moving forward. A lot of teams would say, no, Rosen's our quarterback. We're not going to even worry about the quarterback position. And at that point, maybe that would have been the better play, because they say, well, we like this, we like these players, but we don't need a quarterback. So come to us with an offer to trade for the number one pick. They didn't do that. And so they are doing the prudent thing and doing all the homework they can. And they still won't get together for another week to actually discuss who the pick might be. So it is foolish to think that as an organization, they've decided that it's Kyler. Now, Kingsbury, he might have decided that he's the favorite. That as much as he likes Rosen, he thinks that Kyler, and probably does feel that Kyler, and that's what he was said back in October. I think he thinks this kid is special, as in Hall of Fame level, game-changing, generational type player. And if that's what he believes, he's going to pound the table for him. He's not going to be the biggest voice in that room when it comes to personnel. We know that. I think we've seen that Steve Keim has been, and will be the voice in the room when it comes to personnel.
Right, and that's the end of it. And you and I talked about this off the air, and if we're going to discuss like Kyler, I think this needs to be said and understood what you and I think about it. One, we're not at all the diehard, they have to keep Rosen, this is dumb, stupid, blah, blah, blah. Like, from a team building aspect, you and I are much more in the, hey, let's take this other guy that we're going to talk about a little later, and see what Rosen has for the next couple of years, and then move on from there. However, I think when you look at the biggest criticism of Steve Keim, and it's been basically short-lived. I would say it's been from 2017 and on. So the final year of Bruce Arians, and then obviously the Wilkes debacle. The biggest criticism has been it doesn't seem like he knows where he's going. He's getting talent and putting talent together, but there doesn't seem to be any meshing of it. You continue to see guys being drafted and playing at positions they've never played. You continue to see failed draft picks along the offensive line just kind of stacking up. I mean, you wrote about it the other day on your site, CardsWire. 2 of the 5 biggest draft busts in the Steve Keim era are guards. And Keim played guard in the NFL, or in college. So he, obviously Jonathan Cooper's injury was a freak thing, but Dorian Johnson didn't even get out of camp. I mean, that dude was so bad he didn't even get out of camp. And so when you look at it from that vantage point, and then you come around and say, I'm building a team in my coach's image, all of a sudden you can at least make a cognizant argument on why you would take Kyler Murray and move on from Josh Rosen after a year. Because if your head coach is saying, and Jess and I are not saying that we're hearing what Cliff Kingsbury is saying, this is what he's saying behind closed. No, we're not saying that. What we're saying is he has had an affinity for a player for 5 or 6 years. He's wanted Kyler Murray to be his quarterback since he was the head coach at Texas Tech. and he went down and watched him win one of 43 straight games in high school football in Texas. And this is the guy that he's wanted since, for the last 6 seasons. And if this is the guy and you are building in that coach's image, then it makes a logical sense to give him that. Now, again, we're not advocating for that. I think, again, both you and I advocate for something else. But the reality is, if that is what Kingsbury is asking for, and Keim is trying to build a roster in a direction, in an image, then at least it makes sense of why he would move that direction.
Right. Now, on the flip side, there's 100 reasons why you don't even consider Kyler. Obviously, number one is if you look at it in terms of risk, there's never been a sub 6 foot quarterback. Sub 6 foot, that is. Baker Mayfield technically was 6 foot, but he would be the first sub 6 foot quarterback ever drafted in the first round. He is slighter now, and the fact that he weighed in at over 200 pounds is good, but the fact that he didn't run it over 200 pounds makes you wonder. Now, we've discussed this before, that might not necessarily be all that important, but his ability to keep that frame on and play the grueling NFL season with the big physical play that there is a question mark. Then you have another question mark. Well, how viable is Cliff Kingsbury's offense in the NFL anyway? That's another question mark that you have.
And it's a legitimate question.
And in terms of this is drafting someone like Kyler Murray in the first round and not having him be a star. That's crippling to a team because it's a job breaker. It's a career ender because, when Michael Bidwill comes to Steve Keim, comes to Cliff Kingsbury, and Kyler Murray doesn't work out. He's an average or even a below average quarterback. And well, why'd you draft him? Then he didn't really match up. He didn't have the measurables. He didn't have this. And so you look stupid. You look stupid for doing it. You look great. You look revolutionary if he works out. And I think that's where we're at with Kingsbury. But the thing that the reason why it makes sense not to do it for another reason, this is something I don't know if we talked about on any of the shows yet, is the locker room factor. Because if you draft a quarterback number 1 overall, we know what the result of the year is going to be. With the exception of
the best case scenario is like a Dak Prescott type year, right?
Maybe Andrew Luck, and that was a weird year because Luck took his team to the playoffs. And that was really kind of the Chuck Pagano being ill and Bruce Arians, which his rise through the coaching ranks quickly. So but that is so irregular in terms of first year. So you went with the rookie quarterback last year. And while it never was really written about, weeks later, after Sam Bradford was benched for Josh Rosen, and understandably so, Bradford was awful. But it came out weeks later that there were veterans in the locker room who weren't really happy with the fact that Bradford was benched, because what was kind of the selling point for the season with Bradford starting is that they were going to be competitive, and they weren't. You put a rookie quarterback, you're going to be a bad team. And so if you then scrap Josh Rosen, who earned the respect of his teammates on the field, he was tough. He learned. In fact, everything we heard pretty much everyone that talked about Rosen said great things. He was improving. He was a leader. He won them over with his smarts, with his toughness and everything. And so now the players in the locker room have a guy that they will battle with and battle for and believe that he will improve. So they know they're going in the right direction. But if they scrap him to take another quarterback right away, that's not going to sit well with some guys, especially say this is the situation a year ago. Patrick Peterson asked for a trade because he was tired of losing. He didn't like the direction of the team. He was given assurances by Michael Bidwill about competitiveness and adding teams. And when you turn around and dump your second year quarterback that they believe is going to be a franchise quarterback for another rookie, that kind of says the opposite.
Well, and it also, I get where both sides are coming from on this fight. And so one of the things I would say about Keim is that he's really lamented not standing on the table for Russell Wilson. Now, hindsight's obviously 2020, and it's really easy to make that statement now. However, if that's a true statement, if that's something that that he's truly lamenting, you hope that Keim is not thinking, I can't screw this up again. You're hoping he's not more afraid of passing on Kyler Murray than he is on sticking with Josh Rosen, if that makes sense. And so when you look at the Murray situation, I've said all along, like, I don't understand why it would happen from that standpoint, simply because, as you said, this is a guy, or this is a team that has kind of already put the time and energy into that first year tank. And drafting Murray won't set you back years or anything like that. Obviously, if he flops, it will. But I mean, we can say the same for Josh Rosen. If Rosen doesn't grow from year 1 to year 2, it doesn't matter, right? Like none of these conversations matter. So it's not this inherent like, oh, Rosen guarantees you that you'll take a step forward this year. It's just that Rosen at least has NFL experience. He's got NFL time in, and he's a guy that has been there and done that and had some, successful moments in the league. Whereas Murray is just an extension of and maybe he comes in and, throws 25 touchdowns and only 10 interceptions as a rookie. And that's great. That's wonderful. Maybe he does that and everything. But what happens if he does that and the team only wins 5 games? And in the same way, Rosen goes for 25 and 10, but because they were able to add, another player at the first pick, they win 7 games. So, I mean, that's kind of what Jess and I are saying about this is like, it's not necessarily that you're guaranteed that Rosen will be a guy that's going to win you 5 to 7 games this year, but it's more likely that you're going to see another 3 to 5 win team with Kyler Murray than you are a 6 to 8 win team with Kyler Murray. And we're just talking about in year 1. We're not talking about for the foreseeable future. And so unless your prognostication, your grade of Murray is such that you're saying this is a multi-time Pro Bowl, all-pro type of quarterback, then you're going to have the same growth pains, whether he is or not. You're going to have the same growth pains in year 1. So you're saying, okay, 2019 is a year where we look to improve, maybe win 5 or 6 games. And then in 2020, you're looking to compete for a wild card playoff spot, maybe as a 9-win team. Maybe you sneak up to 10 wins. And then in 2021, you are a contending team. And all Jess and I are saying is you're with the idea of Murray is that all of that gets pushed back an additional year. So in 2019, you're probably reserving yourself because, I mean, let's be honest, it's not like they've built a juggernaut roster and they can bring in a rookie quarterback and he can be a guy that, just manages game. Like they need a quarterback that can put them in a position to win games. And for most people, that guy right now would be Josh Rosen. Now, you can't be afraid of a down year or another, 3, 4, 5 win season under Kyler Murray if you truly believe that the leap in year 1 to 2 will be exponentially more than what the leap would be in year 2 to 3 for Rosen. And so those are the questions that have to be asked. But as Jess said, you're going to have to convince your team of that too. I mean, you're talking about Larry Fitzgerald coming back again. Corey Peters is up after this year, right? I mean, you're talking about guys that are, Patrick Peterson only has 1 year left after this year, and is he going to be comfortable with that? Like, is he a guy that is going to want to stick around when Kyler Murray, if they draft Kyler Murray, is he going to want to stick around to have to wait till 2021 when they're potentially competing for a playoff spot again? Those are all valid and reasonable questions and concerns to have. And that doesn't even get to the questions of on the field with Murray, right? And like, if you just take height out of it, there are legitimate concerns with Murray, the player, that are available to be brought up, that are just, I mean, you're able to look at them and say, like, this is a guy that, he may struggle. He may struggle adapting in year 1. I don't think anybody really questions that, do they? Maybe they do. But he's a guy that is likely going to struggle in year 1 with the speed of the NFL game, in terms of throwing lanes closing, in terms of guys. Now, of course, I said everything like this about Baker Mayfield, so what do I know, right? Like,
right. And maybe a part of it is the fact that because of the success of Russell Wilson and the success of Patrick Mahomes from year 1 to year 2, sitting behind somebody, and then even Baker Mayfield, maybe they look at, because really, as we look back at Russell Wilson, it felt like after the fact, when we saw the success, people are going, oh yeah, he was a plus everything except for size.
Right. And again, I think this goes back to the idea that he wasn't a guy that, so the question coming out of this year, when Kyler Murray finished, was not, would he enter the draft? The question was he going to go play professional baseball or go play for Oklahoma an additional year? I don't think anybody really thought he was going to come out and play professional football. And so, that makes everything, that changes everything. It flat out does. And you can't. And so for that reason, when people say, well, this wasn't even a thing until, that clip of Cliff talking about how good, or that he would take Murray number 1 overall if he was in the NFL draft. That's not the only reason this happened. This happened because all of a sudden now he's actually a guy that you can draft. He's a guy that you don't have to worry about the baseball thing because he's paid back the money. And between us on the show, nobody repeat this. Allegedly, he may not want to play for the Oakland A's, and so that's a whole thing too. So when you look at it from all those perspectives, it just it was never a realistic option at the time, and so now it is. And so you have to ask yourself again. The biggest question is: do the Cardinals grade him as a guy that is better? Not necessarily year 1 versus year 2, but going forward, is Josh Rosen or Kyler Murray the better choice? And honestly, we won't know. And now or tomorrow, or heck, we'll likely not know by the end of the season. If Josh Rosen is the quarterback of the Arizona Cardinals, I would be willing to wager that he has a better statistical season than Kyler Murray.
Right. That makes sense. It does. It really does. Now, the one other thing that kind of the last thing to talk about this would be, if they go with Kyler Murray, it would be, for me, such a drastic change from the script that they've been following almost to a T, and that is copying the Rams and the Bears, right? So they've gone out of their way. So they have a young quarterback that struggled in their rookie year. They have running back talent there. They have defensive. They have great defensive talent, and then they bring in the offensive coach who should help rookie quarterback to year 1 to year 2 be a good quarterback, not necessarily elite quarterback, but a good quarterback. And then they add an important defensive pieces as well. What did you see the Rams do in that year 2? They added pieces, and then from year 2 to year 3, they added more pieces. The Bears, they went and got Khalil Mack, and so now the Cardinals have followed that script almost perfectly, even to the point of the Rams that they got an experienced. They even so where the Rams have Wade Phillips, the former head coach, the experienced defensive guy, the respected around the league. The Cardinals did the same thing in Vance Joseph. Granted, he doesn't have the experience, former head coach, but Vance Joseph is a Wade Phillips guy. So they're running the same defensive system that the Rams are doing. You could even look even more. So you have the Rams running a 3-4 with Wade Phillips. You have now the Cardinals running a 3-4 with the same type of defensive system. The Bears are running a 3-4 in a Vic Fangio system. Again, a lot of the similarities there. And then to go from that to draft Kyler Murray would be to jump off script immediately and start over. Not that that's a bad thing. It could work out. It's very odd.
Well, it is. And like you said, it's off script. But again, I think, this is my whole thing. If you believe that Kyler Murray is the guy that will make the engine go in the Cliff Kingsbury offense more so than any other quarterback, including the one on your roster and Josh Rosen, then at least I can understand what you're looking at. But if you're wanting to build in the mold of what Cliff Kingsbury wants, but you're putting all your eggs in the Cliff Kingsbury basket at that point. And they're already doing that. I get that. But, when you look at it from what Jess is saying, if you're following a model, that's not a model all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden now you are in new territory, you're in fresh territory, and you're going almost a Chip Kelly in Philadelphia route of let's get the guys that Cliff wants in there. Now, to be fair, that can work better than it did for Kelly because you have a guy like Vance Joseph on the other side of the ball who seems to be basically in charge of defense. But, we'll see how that plays out. But for the most part, this whole thing has been kind of cockamamie from the beginning, right?
It has. Kyler Murray isn't the only pick that the Cardinals might do. So he isn't the only player under consideration. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to make the case for a dominant pass rusher, Nick Bosa. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And now we're done with Kyler Murray. Let's make the case for Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa, who was, for months, the top of everybody's draft board. And
I still think he is technically, outside of PFF, I think he's pretty much the consensus number one player.
And it was the top of almost every mock draft. It looked at, Nick Bosa to the Cardinals made all the sense because they didn't have another pass rusher on the other side of Chandler Jones. Even once they hired Vance Joseph, it made even more sense because they went with the pass rusher last year in Bradley Chubb, kind of a surprise. And so you've already got a little bit of history, a little bit of pattern. And so Nick Bosa at the top of the draft to complement Chandler Jones, even though he's going to have to adjust to the 3-4 system, you can kind of mitigate that with a veteran pass rusher and that they signed. And now they add Terrell Suggs. And you have what, honestly, is about as ideal a situation as you can put Bosa in. Maybe he doesn't play as much in the first few weeks as some might like, and so maybe he doesn't have the huge numbers as a rookie, but maybe that happens late in the season as Terrell Suggs gets older and more worn down. But let's think of it this way. You already have a polished pass rusher who has NFL pedigree, whose brother is one of the most disruptive players in the league. And Nick, who is even a little bit more athletic than Joey, he's going to get to play behind a Hall of Famer in Terrell Suggs and one of the most dominant pass rushers in the NFL right now in Chandler Jones. That's great.
And it's great because the Cardinals, when you look at pass rushers, the biggest thing is you can never have too many. It's like cornerbacks. There's always room for multiples, right? So when you look at Bosa, he's a guy that can play on the outside as an edge guy. I was trying to look up Terrell Suggs' combine, but because wasn't that one of the big reasons he fell, or the Cardinals didn't want to draft him or something like that?
I think I don't remember that far back, but I believe based on comments he made, I think it might have had to do with his entitled attitude at the time, being a homegrown kid who was a stud, because he said he was really helped and grounded when he went to that Baltimore Ravens locker room. So it might have been his attitude, honestly.
Yeah. So at the combine, he had a 4.8 440.
Oh.
And only put up 19 reps on the bench. So when you look at what he did and who he was as an athlete, they're honestly, the numbers are eerily similar to what Nick Bosa did. I mean, Bosa was technically more athletic in just the underwear Olympic testing. So when you look at that and you look at kind of who he has, or, coaching him, when you look at the fact that he is, I would say unquestionably, but obviously that's a very strong statement, but I would say unquestionably the most polished overall player in terms of ready to compete at the NFL level along the defensive line, and probably overall in the draft, if I'm being completely honest. And he's a guy that understands how to win with technique already, which is for a 21-year-old dude, that's like crazy impressive.
Yes, Cliff Kingsbury himself called Bosa a can't-miss prospect, which leads you to believe, well, if he's a can't-miss prospect, why in the world would you pass up on him? So that lends itself to the fact that either, maybe Kyler Murray isn't, or maybe they think that he's a can't-miss, but that's getting away from. We're supposed to get away from Kyler Murray. So even Cliff Kingsbury recognizes that Nick Bosa is a can't-miss prospect. He's polished. You see the tape on the field. He said there's no questioning his effort and his desire, or he's not going to be a problem in the locker room. So really, he is a perfect pick at the top of the draft. He's not necessarily the only pick worth. So you can make the argument for Kyler Murray. You can make the argument for Nick Bosa. And the truth is the Cardinals set themselves up in the offseason through free agency that really they can make almost any, like, of those top guys at the top of the draft, you can go any direction and have it make some sort of sense. Like, we both think that Kyler Murray makes the least sense of all, but if that's what they want to do, then it makes sense. Nick Bosa makes sense. You want to give that defense teeth to allow Josh Rosen to develop that offense and Cliff Kingsbury to work his offensive magic. And you put the talent there. Then you've got Patrick Peterson and Robert Alford, who they've been raving about in terms of a talent. Then you add the 3 pass rushers, and that really makes the defense for Vance Joseph hum. And by doing that, you have a dominant defense and you have a young offense that can do that. And you're really putting yourself in a place to succeed. So, it goes without saying that you can make a very strong case for Nick Bosa at the top of the draft. And the other part is, while we're going to talk about another guy at a less premium position, edge rusher will always be a premium position worthy of the top pick in the draft.
Well, and the other thing you have to remember is this, and I think it's important, and it doesn't get discussed enough, but if you get Nick Bosa and he turns out to be what we all expect, a guy that's going to go, 9 to 11 sacks a season every year, that you have a player that will in-house to replace Chandler Jones. And so Jones's contract is up in what, 2 years or 3 years?
2 years after this, but he's got 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, so including this year, 3 years. So you'll get 3 years of Bosa and Jones together, and then Jones will be 31 when his contract ends. You'll have the ability to re-sign him if need be. But the great thing is, obviously, you get it right, that you are able to replace Jones in-house. You don't have to go out and spend big money or, trade picks or I mean, look at what the guy from New England get that's like a third of Bosa, or maybe he's just half of Bosa, or not Bosa, of Jones at this point, but was it Trey Flowers?
Oh my gosh.
And he's getting paid more than Jones is. And I know that we're talking about, inflation and blah, 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 and all that good stuff. But when it comes down to it, you're still getting Nick Bosa on a better deal. And it makes sense in my mind to really step up with those, players and build from, in the Vance Joseph model of spend your high picks on edge rushers and perimeter defenders in what, in terms of cornerbacks, and then scheme up the middle. And so, Bosa would be an elite, kind of guy that you can add to your team.
And Nick Bosa makes sense at the top of the draft. Kyler Murray makes sense. We've made the case for both. Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to talk about another guy that really we think is also worthy of that top pick. Defensive tackle Quinnen Williams. That's coming up next. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And now we've made the case for Nick Bosa. We've talked about Kyler Murray plenty. Let's make the case for Quinnen Williams. Now, obviously the first, probably, it's the weakest one, but the argument against Quinnen Williams, number one, is you don't take defensive tackles first overall. It's not a premium position, and you just don't do it. It's like taking a receiver first overall. It's a position you don't draft that high, and even then, definitely the Cardinals have seen, they've taken defensive linemen very high in the draft before and had them not work out all that well. But that's another generation of Cardinals times. But us old timers, we remember them. But let's make the case for Quinnen Williams, because the Cardinals are also set up where he makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you look at it from a need perspective, and God forbid the Cardinals continue to draft for need, but if you look at it from a need perspective, Quinnen Williams is one with a bullet in terms of filling a need. You have a guy that is a ready-made 3-down defensive lineman in the NFL, something that is hard to find. I mean, it just is. It's not something that, you look at Darius Philon, you look at the Cardinals' best defensive lineman, Corey Peters. Those are guys that at best are overworked, getting 60% of the snaps. I can tell you with a certainty that Corey Peters' usage was over what he and the team expected last year because of the lack of growth from some of the younger guys. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I think you look at Quinnen Williams and you say he's a guy that can come in and in year one play 75 to 80% of the snaps. And by year 3, you're probably talking a guy that plays 90% of the snaps, which is not common for a defensive lineman anymore. Like a down lineman, those guys rotate, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah.
So when you look at it from that perspective, you're looking at it from the perspective of he is a guy that comes in and immediately addresses the biggest need still on this team, because they only have, I mean, they have enough.
They don't
bodies,
have 3 starting caliber players.
Right. They don't have exactly. They don't have 3, starting talent wise offensive linemen, but defensive linemen. But when you look at like the best guys, so like Aaron Donald played 90% of the snaps last year. That's about right. I mean, that's about what you want the top guys to play. When you look at who's the other? I mean, Sue played 88% of the snaps. Again, that's about right where you want it to be.
And that's what Calais Campbell played when he was in the last couple of years. He played a lot. Because when you have someone that dominant, you don't take him off the field unless he can't do it.
Right. And so, you look at DeForest Buckner, he was right around 80%. And he was a guy, was he an all-pro this year or just a Pro Bowl? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
But one of the better ones. I mean, he was really, really good this year for the 49ers. So when you're looking at all of that, when you're taking that all into consideration, a guy like Quinnen Williams hits the need, and he's a talented player too. Like, he's a guy that is a top 5 talent in this draft. Now, it's been really interesting to follow the mock drafts, and Jess hit on something with Nick Bosa, and we're starting to see it slightly. And I do mean slightly, but you're starting to see it slightly where Quinnen Williams is falling out of the top 5 in some pretty, at least relevant in terms of named mock drafts. And the reason simply is when it comes down to it, drafting a down defensive tackle, not an edge guy, but a down defensive lineman. So a Calais Campbell type that maybe he plays, in a 34, but you don't see them drafted in the top 2, 3 very often. I mean, you look at the guys that were the top guys drafted in the last several years, and the one that I can remember is Ndamukong Suh. I don't remember a ton of other ones. Do you?
Not really. I mean, you could go Gerald McCoy, but that's been a while.
But that was at 5, so that wasn't even at.
Right.
And so when you just look at the situation, I mean, last year the first DT wasn't taken till 12. 2017, the first DT. Oh wow, that wasn't. I mean, he was not even taken in the top 20. So what we're saying is not that Quinnen Williams is bad. What we're saying is that you don't like guys that play his position typically don't get drafted in the top. I mean, they rarely get drafted in the top 10 now. But when you look at his production in year 1, what he did, you see a guy that was very successful and should command, a top 5 pick. I think Williams is one of the, probably 7 or 8 best players in this draft. But it's, you look at guys like I said, Aaron Donald was picked 13th. Fletcher Cox was picked 12th, I believe. The last guy that went that high was, oddly enough, another Alabama guy, and that was Marcel Darius. And you know, when you look at Darius's production in the NFL, when you look at that draft overall, I think there would be, and he was an all-pro one season, but if you ask Bills fans, they probably would have rather had an A.J. Green or a Patrick Peterson or a Julio Jones. But that was the last top 5 and top 10, unless you consider DeForest Buckner a down defensive lineman. But Buckner was drafted 7th, so it's just not a position that gets drafted in the top 5 very often. And getting drafted at 1 is, I think it was 1994 with the guy out of Maryland that the Dallas Cowboys drafted at 1 overall, was the last time a DT went. Yeah, Cincinnati drafted him. I'm sorry. But it was Big Daddy Dan Wilkinson.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the last time a defensive tackle was drafted at 1. The last time a defensive tackle was drafted at 2 was Ndamukong Suh, and I can't remember off the top of my head what year that was, but I mean, and you got to remember, Suh at Nebraska, 2010. So Suh at Nebraska was, I mean, and this is not to take anything away from what Quinnen Williams did last year, because he was awesome. I mean, he was absolutely phenomenal. But Ndamukong Suh was, I think, 2nd in the Heisman voting. So, and then immediately came in and was an all-pro as a rookie. I mean, he had 10 sacks and 13 tackles for loss as a rookie, and then went on to be a 3-time all-pro. So that dude was off the charts in terms of difference maker. And that's not saying that Quinnen Williams can't be that, but that is what you typically get when you draft a DT at that high, is that you're looking at a guy that should make at least one all-pro team, when you're just talking about the last 2 that were in the top 5. Marcel Darius was an all-pro, and Ndamukong Suh is a 3-time all-pro. So
Gerald McCoy went number 3 that year, right behind Suh.
I thought he went 5.
He was 5. He went Bradford, Suh, McCoy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And honestly, Suh should have been number 1. He would have been number 1 if it weren't because of Sad Bradford.
Right, and again, you look at McCoy, he's a 1-time all-pro. So again, like, you're talking about guys, like, if you're going to draft a guy that high, you're basically saying, like, look, I believe he's going to be an all-pro within his first 3 years, because all of those guys were all pros within their first 3 years. I mean, that's how little it happens in the NBA, because you can find players that are not as maybe physically talented, but can do just as much as guys like Suh or a McCoy in terms of statistical output. Again, nobody's going to be Aaron Donald. I'm just warning all of you now. Like, if they do take Quinnen Williams at 1, he's not going to be Aaron Donald. Don't even like imagine it, because it's not going to happen. So, but you could get a guy that is Gerald McCoy, and that's a good pick. I mean, if he ends up being Ndamukong Suh, I don't think anybody's going to complain, right?
Nope, definitely not. Heck, no one should complain if he's Gerald McCoy.
Right. I mean, because that's a 6-time Pro Bowler and an All-Pro. So it's just an incredible get there when you look at it from that perspective.
So we've made the case for 3 players. There's one other specific player that we're going to make the case for. That's coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. And we're now going to make the case for another edge rusher. In fact, if you listen to Cardinals fans, he is actually, there's a pocket of people who like him even more than Bosa because of it, and that would be Kentucky's Josh Allen. Let us make the case for Allen. Allen, who is now, his testing didn't show it. He had the better 40 time than Bosa. Bosa outdid him in some of the short area quickness of the 3-cone and the 20-yard shuttle. But on tape, Allen not only has the statistical production in pass rushing and disruption, he also saw improvements in run defense. And I think there was an article that I was just reading this evening and recording on a Tuesday night by Steve Palalozo from Pro Football Focus, talking about the improvements that Josh Allen has made. And you can see, despite now his testing didn't show it, but he looks good when he drops too. Something that 3-4 edge players have to do is every once in a while they have to drop in and have assignments in coverage. And so Josh Allen might not be the polished pass rusher that Nick Bosa is, but if you're looking for fit and versatility, some see him. I'm not nearly as good in the scouting area, but there are many who have said that he is Khalil Mack-ish. And Mack didn't get taken first overall. He was drafted a little bit behind. He was not the polished pass rusher. He just has become the dominant the defensive player. But that said, Allen does fit the Cardinals defense now a little bit better. He can do a little more. And you could, again, that edge position is valuable, is premium. So you can make the case for him at the top of the draft.
Yeah, and the reason I have not advocated for Josh Allen is because I truly think he's going to end up being more similar to an Anthony Barr type of player than to a maybe like a obviously not like a Von Miller or anything like that, but I see a guy that has the ability to rush the passer, but is kind of better playing downhill and then can drop into coverage well. So he's a guy that is multifaceted and looks better in terms of playing in space than he does just as a pure pass rusher. And so when you look at Allen and his skill set, I was actually surprised by the fact that he didn't test better. I think a lot of people were, because it's not that he tested poorly. It's just when you kind of watch the tape of him, it really comes across as he's just out athleting people, because he's not a guy that has a ton of pass rushing moves in his repertoire at this point, right? And so when you look at it from that perspective, he's a guy that may be a little stiff around the corner. He's not a guy that exactly is going to have, those long arms like a Chandler Jones. So it's just, he's a guy to watch in terms of, like, if the Cardinals were to move down, it seems like it would be a much easier pill to swallow than a guy taken at 1 overall that we're not sure if he's going to be able to be a consistent pass rusher. And then if you're using him in coverage, then that really seems like a wasted number 1 pick.
Well, if that's what all they end up doing. But that said, there will be plenty of people pleased with that pick. The guys that we've talked about, Kyler Williams, Nick Bosa, Quinnen Williams, and Josh Allen, there will definitely be those who aren't happy with Allen. There will definitely be those who aren't happy with Murray. But for the most part, none of those 4 players would be hated as a pick. All of them make sense. All of them are number 1 pick worthy. But that isn't all that the Cardinals can do. So coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, for the last time we're going to talk about is, what if they trade out? Okay, the teams that might be involved, where they might be drafted, and then some names that could come into play there. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, and we're ready to move on to talk about players. From talking about players to now moving on to, okay, We've made the case for 4 specific players. Now we're going to make the case for trades. We're going to talk about trade scenarios, who might be involved, what they might get, and who are the types of players that they could do. I think pretty much everyone would believe that if anyone could be involved, it would be the Oakland Raiders because they have the 3 number 1 draft picks. So the Cardinals could be looking at least 4-24 and 4-27. So they don't trade back too far, but they pick up another first round pick. Now, well, we're not going to talk for the teams like the Raiders. We're not going to worry about that second first round pick. We'll deal with those if and when that happens, and we'll talk about other offensive, defensive players. We're focusing on that first pick. The Raiders at number 4. Who could be in play then? Obviously, it is possible. So if Murray goes number 1 or Haskins, that means of those 3 top players, they're still in play for one of them. But what if your favorite, like they don't love Josh Allen as much, and Bosa and Quinnen Williams are both gone? Who else could be in play other than Josh Allen?
I think when you look at like pick 4 to about 9, there are a group of players that fit needs, either in the immediacy or over the next couple of years. And fans will hate this, but you've got a guy in obviously Ed Oliver, who is a guy that I would actually put on par as being worthy of the first pick in the draft. I think he's an absolute game changer of a player, and he's a guy that you could get at 4 if Bosa and Williams are gone. Then there's Jonah Williams out of Alabama. I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, he's a guard. That's a waste of a pick, blah, blah, blah. But he's a guy that I think has proven that he can play left tackle. So if the Cardinals move on from DJ Humphries, he can do that. If he beats out J.R. Sweezy or Justin Pugh, then obviously he can play guard, or he can be a guy that starts at guard and kicks out to right tackle for Marcus Gilbert after 1 year if they do re-sign DJ Humphries. So he's a guy that I like there. Devin White, I don't know if he's the consensus top linebacker in this draft, but I know he's a good ball player. He's a guy that, much to the chagrin of a lot of Cardinals fans, that could be in play if they trade down, because despite the fact that they've invested heavily in the linebacker position in basically every year that Steve Keim has been the general manager, they still don't have 2 starting quality inside backers for the 34. And then when you look at it from there, it kind of gets into a pick your poison. Like, you have a Jawan Taylor out of Florida, who is a right tackle, and can you justify taking a right tackle at 4, especially when you just traded for Marcus Gilbert? That's, so he's a guy that that's probably a year away, right? Like, he's probably not going to be the guy this year, which is, it's fine. But again, people just have to be prepared for that. What about a guy like a Montez Sweat, who tore up the combine? I don't know what the heart situation ended up being for him. I really didn't follow that up because I don't really worry about those things unless it's to the point where he has to get checked if he can play again. I mean, they let him test, so it wasn't, who was the guy? It wasn't like, oh man, who's the guy the Raiders picked last year? Maurice Hurst. Remember when they sent him home? Like, that's a lot different to me. But a guy to know and to think about that even over a Josh Allen would be Brian Burns, another edge rusher out of Florida State. So if the draft ends up going, Murray at 1 to a team, not the Cardinals, and then Bosa and Quinnen Williams, a guy like Brian Burns is a dominant athletic pass rusher in the mold of like a Danielle Hunter, in Minnesota, who's been, a complete stud for them. So he's a guy that could come in and play off the edge and be a guy that knows how to win and rush the passer really well. So he's another guy that I think would fit in there in that group. So, those are a group of, about 5 players that if the Cardinals decided to trade down to 4 and they're in fact top 3, and again, we're assuming that when they trade down, it's going to be for Kyler Murray, a team is trading up for, then you look at it and Bosa and Williams are gone, who, we are guessing are there other 2 players that are likely to be they're in the mix for the first pick overall. Then you kind of get down to, all right, is it Josh Allen? Is it Ed Oliver? Is it, Jawan Taylor? Is it Devin White, Jonah Williams, Brian Burns? So those are, that's a nice group of players to have to choose from there. And at that point, it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. I think the only one, well, I guess Devin White could possibly come in and play right away, but the only one out of that group that plays right away is Ed Oliver, right?
Probably. Now, since Seth was talking to kind of a group of players, let's go ahead and talk about the fact that the other most obvious trade partner would be the New York Giants if they wanted to move up to number 1. It seems kind of unlikely because then you'd be looking at number 6, which is still in that range of players. They probably wouldn't give up 6 and 17. That's a dream that the Cardinals would have, and I can be convinced 6 and 17 might be the better deal than 4 and 24 or 4 and 27, depending on who's there at number 6. But that might end up being 6 and 37. Not a bad deal. Plus maybe something in the future.
And then a 2020 first. Yeah.
Yeah. You could do from 4 to 6. You'll kind of look at the sum of those same players. A team that hasn't really been discussed is the Denver Broncos. And it came to light recently was at the owners' meetings that John Elway is using, a good chunk, at least I think he said 4 or 5 of his official visits on quarterbacks. And he's kind of looking at all 4 of the top quarterback prospects. Yeah, they got Joe Flacco, but I think John Elway's feeling the pressure to get a young quarterback. And I think they might be a long shot. But what if they got involved? Obviously, the haul for the Broncos don't have nearly what to give up what other teams, because they've got the 10th pick in the first round where the Cardinals selected Rosen a year ago. They've got the 9th pick in the second round and the 7th pick in the third round. So it's not – they don't have as much to offer. But what if they came into play and the number 10 pick ends up being where they're going? There are some players that I've seen in some mock drafts. If Jawan Taylor's off the board, Jonah Williams off the board, a guy that you didn't mention is Michigan's Rashawn Gary, who's a really kind of interesting because of his size. He seems a little bit big for the edge, but productive enough to be there, but could also play the interior, but seems to be better on the edge. Cody Ford could come into play around there. Could the Cardinals pull the trigger on a receiver like DK Metcalf?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I like Metcalf. I'm not sure how he fits into Cliff's offense. That's my only question. But what about like a move tight end like Noah Fant or if TJ Hawkinson was to fall? Those are 2 guys that are basically younger versions of Charles Clay. We're hearing quite a bit about Hakeem Butler out of Iowa State? Yeah, Iowa State. So those are all guys that would kind of fit into what they want to do. What about Andre Dillard? I mean, you want to talk about a guy that has a complete PhD in terms of the air raid. Like, that would be a huge get, in my opinion, if you're able to get somebody like him at that type of pick. And so, and the other one is this. And so I don't know, have you written about the formal visits or workouts or whatever they're doing, like not the guys that they see at pro days, but like the guys that they've worked out and have private visits with?
A handful. I haven't looked at the full list, but
So,
I run across them. I catch my eyes. Hey, that's something to pay attention, because you always want to pay attention. Okay, especially their middle round guys. I mean, Chase Edmonds was a guy that they fell in love with, and that was a name that you had long before they made the pick.
Yeah, and one of the so here's a name to know, and I don't like, this is not inside information or anything like that, but this is just a name to know, to keep in mind and we're talking about, obviously trade down scenarios, but if they're able, if they stay at 1 and then pick again at 33, this is just a name to know, and it's Eric McCoy out of Texas A&M. Now, he's a center, and I know people are going to go, well, they got Mason Cole, but one of the biggest concerns about Cole is his shotgun snapping. So if you like McCoy, he comes from the spread offense at Texas A&M. He's a guy that they've worked out in private already. So when you look at it from those kind of angles, he's kind of that, spread air raid type of center that Cole is not. Now, this isn't to say Cole is going to get replaced or anything like that, but
the Cardinals have always said between last year and this year, that even recently, is that they like every comment that I've heard. I heard it from Kingsbury today when I was listening to the video after the fact, is that it's not like they said they were thrilled. They loved his play. They liked what he did last year, but they also like his ability to play other positions. He's played tackle in college, and when he was drafted, they said that he could play guard too. So I think they see Cole as a guy that can move as well.
Right, and so that's just a name to know, because they brought McCoy in. They've done the private workout thing with him, and he was a dude that like shot up the pro or the draft boards because of his workout. Like he ran a 4.89 at 315 pounds. So he's a guy that. He's a guy that's been very successful in his career. He started 38 games in a row, and 36 were at center. The other 2 were at guard. And so he just you go, if you want to see the worst film for 3 guys that are going to get drafted in the first round, that's Quinnen Williams, Christian Wilkins, and Dexter Lawrence. Eric McCoy was the one blocking them a lot of the time in those games. So, like, the dude is extremely talented, and he's on the radar for the Cardinals already. So that's just, when you're kind of starting to piece this all together, that's just one name to know, because like Jess said, if they move down and they're sitting in the middle of that first round, or move down with the Raiders and they're sitting in the 20s of that first round, Eric McCoy is a guy that is a slam dunk, like day one type starter. And while everybody likes Mason Cole for one being healthy,
that was, I think he did do a good job of adjusting to the position, but there was never any point where he was praised for how well he was playing.
Right. And so that's that. McCoy is definitely like a name just to keep in the back of your mind.
Excellent. And with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. And we'll be back in a week. We're going to talk about the offensive side of the ball next week, since offensive linemen, tight ends, receivers, the Cardinals need all sorts of talent on the offensive side of the ball.
The only position the Cardinals don't need is the one that they've brought in a bunch of guys at, and that's running back and quarterback. So I'm sure that's what they'll draft, because the NFL makes no sense.
Again, so that wraps this up. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back in a week. We've got 2 more weeks of. We haven't decided we're going to do 2 weeks in a row or 3, and then a break, and then our mock draft. We're going to do 3 weeks in a row. That'll be to be determined over the next couple of weeks. But that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again in a week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.